Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you do not have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. The Pope has just passed away. So that's really breaking news. Yeah, Pope Francis. He was an advocate for many noble causes, including ending the genocide in Gaza. And in fact, that was what he called for in his last message on Easter Sunday, right as he met with also J.D. Vance. Vice President J.D. Vance met him, and then
coincidence?
Shortly afterwards, he passed. So rest in peace to Pope Francis, and to anyone who's mourning his death today. You know, we send you our thoughts.
Yeah, I'm mourning his death. I'm not Catholic, but he was the best Pope in recent memory. I mean, not that it's kind of damning him with faint praise, but yeah, he was great. And you know, Aaron, he spoke out about the proxy war. We'll have to find that clip for this later this week, because I just realized
he was a proxy war critic. I mean, you know, he was the first Pope from Latin America, and perhaps because of the long legacy of U.S. meddling there, he was critical of a U.S. foreign policy, and actually took his mandate seriously of representing the poor and standing up for ordinary people. And not everyone in that position has always done that. So he really was unique in that respect.
Yeah. So RIP to the Pope. And I guess most people who really believe in him, the good news is that you believe that he's in heaven. So it's sad, but not quite as sad for you as it is for heathens like me. I guess I'm technically agnostic. But what I'm not agnostic about is how great this show is and how terrible Meet the Press is. So should we go to Meet the Press for its recap?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Press play on Meet the Press.
Good Sunday morning. President Trump's standoff with the courts is escalating as his mass deportation plans are facing multiple legal challenges. On Saturday, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked the Trump administration from deporting a group of Venezuelan migrants under an 18th century wartime law. A federal judge is now threatening to hold the administration in criminal contempt for refusing the judge's order to turn around planes filled with deportees headed for a prison in El Salvador. And the Supreme Court has ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of one of those deportees, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who the Justice Department admitted was deported due to an administrative error. The issue at the center of this case is due process protections, a constitutional protection guaranteed to all individuals in the United States, regardless of their citizenship status. Abrego Garcia was not.
Until now, spoiler alert, we don't have due process anymore, everybody. That's one of the new inventions of the Trump era, where due process. I mean, certainly Trump didn't start this for everybody, but he's taken the denial of due process to a new level. So that's what Trump is bringing to the table. And he's actually getting some pushback from Senator Chris Van Hollen, of Maryland, who went to El Salvador to meet with this man who was deported, Abrego Garcia. Yeah. So, and we'll actually hear from him shortly.
From Chris Van Hollen, not from Abrego Garcia. Yeah.
Given a hearing before he was deported, but the White House is so far refusing to act, arguing Abrego Garcia is a member of a violent gang, MS-13, accusations his wife and attorney deny.
They want this man to be brought back into our country where he can be free and to stay as a happily Maryland, they call him the Maryland man. He's a Maryland.
Okay, they don't call him the Maryland man, by the way. Maybe Trump does when he's like reviewing what to say. He's like, what do I say about the Maryland man? But yeah, anyway.
Father. No, this is a violent person.
He's not. Okay, so he's not a married man and father. He's a violent person. As if those things like contradict each other. But, as we're going to hear from Chris Van Hollen, and as apparently our anchors of these news shows ranging from Fox to Meet the Press don't understand there is you are innocent until proven guilty, and you have to present evidence in court. You can't just say it like Trump is shooting from the hip or like Pam Bondi is.
Testified, an immigration judge ruled he was a member of MS-13. An appellate judge ruled he was a member of MS-13. Hard stop. He should not be in our country.
El Salvador's president meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office this week also refused to send him back.
How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
Of course you do, and especially if Donald Trump cooperated. But as we'll see, he's not doing that. So Bukele and Trump are playing a fun game of like legal hot potato, if you will, trying to blame the other one. Not even blame the other one because they're not criticizing each other, but trying to say the ball is in the other one's court. The hot potato, to continue the metaphor, is in the other one's court.
Abrego Garcia, married to a U.S. citizen and a father of 3 with a work permit in Maryland, entered the U.S. illegally in 2011. He's never been charged with a crime in the U.S. and has no criminal record in the U.S. or El Salvador. And in 2019, a judge ruled he should not be deported to El Salvador because of fears for his safety. This week, Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland traveled to El Salvador to push for the release of Abrego Garcia, but was denied entry to the prison.
If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights and due process for everyone else in America.
Now, Van Hollen did meet with Abrego Garcia in El Salvador. El Salvador's president shared images of the meeting on social media where he mocked the senator's visit. The White House saying of Abrego Garcia, he's not coming back, while attacking Senator Van Hollen's trip.
Look, he's a fake. I know him. I know them all. They're all fake. And they have no interest in that prisoner. That prisoner's record is unbelievably bad. Our people voted for me to get them out. They want them out. They want them out. And we've done a hell of a job.
President Trump even floated the idea this week that he might deport U.S. citizens to foreign prisons.
We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country, but you'll have to be looking at the laws on that.
And
so, you know how people are always like, I'm not racist, but, you know, it's never good to have a but after that, right? So he's like, we have to follow the laws, but, you know.
He sounds very disappointed he has to follow the laws.
Yeah.
And maybe he'll find a way around that to deport people he doesn't like. Why not?
Yeah. Which I think, by the way, this may be one of the things, like, you know, Joseph McCarthy, what got him in trouble was not going after, you know, so-called communists, dissidents, like filmmakers, like he did with the Hollywood 10, etc. It was what got him in trouble was when he went after the army, because that's, you know, sacrilege to attack service members. So I'm hoping that Trump, if he goes after or says he'll go after citizens, that will scare people in a way that, unfortunately, going after people with green cards and visas hasn't necessarily. Although I will say this is bringing together some of the left and liberals, because I think there's a consensus that this is awful.
All right. Well, let's hear from Senator Chris Van Hollen, who just wrapped up that trip to El Salvador.
Is Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Senator Van Hollen, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Kristen, good to be with you.
It's wonderful to have you. I know you've had a long several days, so we really appreciate your being here in person. You just returned from El Salvador, as I just laid out, to meet with Mr. Abrego Garcia. You were rebuffed multiple times from entering the prison where he was initially being held. Secot. He has, as you said, been moved since then to a different facility. Did you accomplish what you set out to on this trip?
I did. I had two missions. One was to ask the government of El Salvador to not be complicit in this illegal scheme with the Trump administration and to release him. I made that request to the vice president. They denied that request. My other major purpose was to just see Abrego Garcia, to see if he's alive. Nobody has heard from him since he was disappeared. He tried to make a phone call from the Baltimore Detention Center after he was illegally abducted, but he couldn't do that. So my purpose was to meet with him, to be able to tell his wife, Jennifer, and his family that he was alive. And despite all the circumstances, he said that his biggest worry was about his family.
Well, it was an emotional news conference with his wife standing there with you. You know, while you were in El Salvador, the White House was counter-programming, effectively releasing information about Mr. Abrego Garcia's background, including
which we're going to repeat, even though it's totally irrelevant to a case of due process. Again, this is something none of the hosts seem to understand.
a police report suggesting he's a member of MS-13, details about a restraining order from his wife who ultimately dropped the matter, and a police report in which an officer said he suspected Mr. Abrego Garcia may have been involved in human trafficking. Now, he's never been charged with a crime, but is his past complicating the broader argument that you are trying to make here about due process?
Okay, this is just a very embarrassing question. I understand, like, behind closed doors, you may say, is this not politically expedient because he's not a good poster child for innocence? But again, the whole point of this is that this is a case of a question of due process. And in due process, it doesn't really matter what you're accused of. You have to have your day in court, and then you can litigate what he's done. But it's good to know that Kristen Welker is a literal mouthpiece for the Trump administration.
Well, what Donald Trump is trying to do is change the subject. Let's make no bones about that, right? This subject is that the Trump administration is ignoring a Supreme Court order 9-0 to facilitate his return because they admitted in court, the Trump administration, that he'd been wrongfully detained. Now, what I have said is Donald Trump and his administration need to put up or shut up in court. Instead of litigating this through social media, here's what the judge in the court case said, and I want to read it to be precise. On April 16th, she said that the Trump administration had presented no evidence linking Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or to any terrorist activity, end quote. So if you have evidence, take it to the court. That's where we litigate these things. And otherwise, just shut up on social media.
You know, the other thing that we witnessed at the White House this week, Patty Morin, the mother of Rachel Morin, who is a Maryland woman who was murdered by an undocumented immigrant, you're very familiar with this, was at the White House, and she did speak from the White House briefing room. I want to play you a little bit of what she had to say and get your reaction on the other side. Take a look.
To have a senator from Maryland who didn't even acknowledge or barely acknowledged my daughter and the brutal death that she endured, leaving her 5 children without a mother and now a grandbaby without a grandmother, so that he can use my taxpayer money to fly to El Salvador to bring back someone that's not even an American citizen. Why does that person have more right than I do?
No, I'm sorry for what she's gone through, but no one's saying that this man has more rights than you. I mean, I never understand this argument that because someone's a victim of a horrific crime, that someone else should be denied their due process rights. But this is a common Republican talking point now. It's like really, they're exploiting this woman's suffering. It's really cynical.
Yeah, it's really cynical, really disgusting. You know, far be it from like anyone to want to criticize this woman, right? But they're obviously using her. And we don't have to play his response because what he says very well. But again, this is like we're making fun of the media here. So I just want to say a couple things. One is, as he points out, this is totally unrelated. As you just pointed out, Aaron, it has nothing to do with it. this is a typical case of Republicans pivoting to emotional arguments. Like, remember Homer, the immigration czar? Homan, like Homer Simpson. Homan said, what about insert like victim of allegedly an undocumented, an illegal crime? What about her due process? Well, that's a totally, no one's, I mean, this person, it wasn't this woman, but it's just an example of what they pivot to. They just pivot to emotional argument. Like Trump pivoted to people like bashing an old lady's head with a baseball bat. That's why they're making the argument. There's no connection here. They're just trying to prey on people's emotions. And that's why when asked about due process, Homan pivots to, was this person killed, denied due process? And the difference is, you know, like Senator Van Hollen is visiting El Salvador to see how our government and another government is treating someone who lives in the United States. He's not like, it's not like he had the opportunity to visit a murderer, to appeal to the murderer to not murder someone, you know? It's just like the parallel is not there. But what's significant, I think, is that Welker has the gall to play this obvious talking point, and that they did the same thing on Fox News, which I think speaks to how bipartisan the stupidity of our media is. Should we show his response or just go to the next clip? I don't think we need to show his response.
We can move on. Well, what's interesting is it's not just Republicans who are criticizing Senator Van Hollen for making this trip. It's also Democrats and Governor Gavin Newsom of California basically said that this effort by Senator Van Hollen was a distraction. So he was asked about that as well.
Gavin Newsom of California calling Mr. Abrego Garcia's case, quote, the distraction of the day. He argues Democrats are playing right into the hands of President Trump, an issue he wants to be focused on. How do you respond to Governor Newsom?
I don't think it's ever wrong to stand up for the Constitution. And this is not about one man. If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights for everybody. I think Americans are tired of elected officials or politicians who are all finger to the wind, what's blowing this way, what's blowing that way. And anybody who can't stand up for the Constitution and the right of due process doesn't deserve to lead.
Great point. And, you know, that also applies to Gaza, where Senator Van Hollen has been more vocal than pretty much everybody, almost everybody else, in criticizing Israel, although he's still voted to arm Israel, which is incoherent. But Gavin Newsom could learn something there, I think.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And, you know, something else the Democrats could do is they could explain to people why cracking down on immigration is not the right thing for the American economy. I mean, they could explain to people the value, the economic value of having people, having immigrants come to this country. They don't do that. They have no moral argument except for, I mean, Van Hollen does have a moral argument, but the Democratic Party kind of like writ large formally has no argument about immigration, and they really could have good ones, and they fail to present them. They just are kind of like Republican light on immigration. So then they're not satisfying anyone. They're not satisfying people who care about the rights of undocumented people. And they're also obviously not satisfying the more far right law and order people. So it's a nightmare.
Let's hear from Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana.
Oh, he's the best.
Well, Chris is my friend, and I respect him.
He's talking about Chris Van Hollen, obviously. Okay.
And he's certainly entitled to his opinion, but in my judgment, he is utterly and gloriously wrong. I mean, most of this gauzy rhetoric is just rage bait. Unless you're next level obtuse, you know that Mr. Garcia is never coming back to the United States, ever. And that's not because of President Trump. That's
so. Hold on one second. Let's just pause. This is so cruel, especially given what he's about to say. He's just totally matter of fact about someone never coming back to the United States and being, subjected to this terrible life in this Salvadoran prison that is famous as kind of like a labor camp. Okay.
Because of Mr. President Bukele.
So, and then I cut it off. So he's saying it's not because of Trump that he'll never come back. It's because of President Bukele of El Salvador.
He said up front in the Oval Office that he was not going to return Mr. Garcia. No federal judge, even Jay Wilkinson, has authority over a sovereign country. Besides that, it should not go unnoticed that Mr. Bukele is much closer to President Xi in China than he is to President Trump.
Okay, that's an interesting pivot. He's just manages. You know how Lindsey Graham always manages to talk about Taiwan? Well, here he is managing somehow to bring it to China.
Well, but is he saying that if Bukele doesn't return this man to the U.S., and that's President Xi's fault because President Xi has more sway over him than Donald Trump, and so, you know, our denial of his constitutional rights really comes down to President Xi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Also, can you imagine Trump like admitting that, like, if pushed, like letting Bukele determine something instead of Trump? Like, does Trump strike you as someone who really respects the sovereignty of other countries?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
All he would have to do is get on the phone.
Xi is spending billions of dollars to build infrastructure in El Salvador, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've discussed this case. So he is
kind of blaming President Xi here, but like China's building infrastructure, which again, of course, we would never do in a foreign country. We don't build infrastructure; we destroy it. But really, this is all President Xi's fault that there hasn't been movement because China's spending more money there. So really, our hands are tied.
Our hands are tied.
The final point I would make, whether you agree with it or not, is Bukele hates MS-13. And Mr. Garcia allegedly is a member of MS-13. The other point I would make is that Chris says Mr. Garcia's had no due process. He's been in front of 17 judges, some of them twice. Probably $5 million worth of legal fees, and he hadn't had to pay a dime. Final point I'd make, look, this was a screw up in my opinion.
Okay, this is a big deal, okay? So, well, one thing really quickly, being in front of judges on unrelated immigration issues does not mean that you have due process right now while you're being sent to another country without a trial and a hearing. But what he's going to say right now is pretty significant.
He hadn't had to pay a dime. Final point I'd make, look, this was a screw up in my opinion. The administration won't admit it, but this was a screw up. Mr. Garcia was not supposed to be sent to El Salvador. He was sent to El Salvador.
So it sounds like he was denied due process if you're admitting it was a screw up. Like, you know, if it's a screw up and he's not supposed to be there, it sounds like he's denied due process, no matter whether it costs $5 million or not. I'm not even sure where he got that figure from and why it's relevant, but anyway.
And it's also really scary hearing him acknowledge that it was a screw up and then saying he's not coming back. And he doesn't seem upset about the fact that he's not coming back, by the way.
Democrats saying, look, you know, we told you Trump is a threat to democracy. This is going to happen every other Thursday afternoon. I don't see any pattern here. I mean, you know, someday pigs may fly, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I don't see a pattern here, except for foreign students are being kidnapped off the street and being deported for writing op-eds and for advocating peace in Palestine. And this man was denied due process, now sent off to a foreign gulag. And Trump is talking about even sending U.S. citizens convicted of crimes.
And Trump ignored an order to turn around an airplane with people that was headed to El Salvador. No pattern here. The likelihood of finding a pattern for Kennedy is as likely as pigs flying.
All right. Is that enough of sending?
We have to. Can you just play, Wilson, the second part that I mentioned?
Say you're not going to follow the order of the court.
Do you believe that President Trump is following the orders of the courts right now?
Yes. And I don't believe that President Trump will defy a federal judge's order. If he does, I'll call him out on it. I believe what I said in the clip. I love the rule of law. I love it like the devil loves sin. I think if we start not following federal judicial orders, we undermine the system entirely. Now, that doesn't mean you can't criticize them. You can criticize them, you can appeal them, but you can't choose to not follow them. And I haven't seen President Trump do that. And if he does, I'll say very loudly and clearly that I think he's wrong.
Okay. Let me ask you about
Okay, so there you have it. That's a great argument, except he already has defied federal courts in, for example, ignoring the order to turn around the plane. There's a stay over whether he's in contempt, but that doesn't change the fact that he defied a federal court. So it's great that he's going to call him out if he does that, except someone should, he probably needs to get the memo that he already has done that. Also, I do like the way that he himself has compared himself to the devil. So if I were running against him, I would cut a campaign ad that was like, John Kennedy himself compared himself to the devil.
Yeah, that was an interesting choice of metaphor. Like, he's saying, I love the rule of law, and there's so many choices you can make to show how much you love something. And then he chose the devil, how much the devil loves sin. So yeah. Maybe there's some projection going on there. Because maybe he doesn't know that what he's supporting really is a sin, and the devil would approve. The devil would certainly approve of kidnapping people and sending them away to foreign gulags without due process.
Right.
Well, someone, speaking of the devil, who approves of all this is Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, and let's hear him weigh in.
Removed just because of a tattoo.
In other words, the Alien Enemy Act means you can grab somebody and you can deport them without an extended hearing because you have labeled them a terrorist. Because you've said you've determined that somebody is a member of the gang, and therefore they don't have to go through the extended process of the opportunity to have a full hearing. That's what you're saying. I mean, let's just be clear.
I'm saying we're following the laws of this country, and there's a different procedure for each one. We're doing things within the frame of the law. We're doing things legally. Okay. I stand by that. Now, again, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm not going to argue this in court. That's what the Department of Justice does. But I'm sitting here today thinking we've done the right thing for this nation, following the laws and the Constitution of this country.
So, I mean, yeah, he's not a constitutional lawyer, contrary to his style, which really gives off the vibe of a constitutional lawyer. But I understand you're not going to stand there and argue in court, but you should be able to defend the legality of it, right? Hopefully you've had like a lecture from someone in the Justice Department. And by the way, what you guys were deprived of is right before this, he does that trick. We need to come up with a name for it, Aaron, when they just pivot to an emotional argument, because he, again, is asked a question about the legality and pivots to, a crime committed by an illegal. So we'll have to think about this. And people, if you have any ideas, put it in the chat.
Yeah, the argument basically, because someone else committed a crime against someone else, then this person doesn't have the right to any due process. That's the legal argument that they're putting forward. It's interesting interpretation of the law. It kind of means that everybody would be on the hook for everything, given that if there's a crime somewhere else, that means you lose your rights. But hey, if that's the kind of society that Trump wants to build under Make America Great Again, he is the president. I guess we have to try it out for a couple of years and see how it goes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is kind of what they're doing with like Palestinian people, right? Which is that they, like with Mahmoud Khalil, they have obviously detained him. They have no evidence of any crime that he's committed. So what do? They just point to like random things that other people have done at Columbia. Or with Mohsen Madawi, the second Columbia student who's been detained. I've seen people, I don't know if the government has made this argument, but I've seen idiotic defenders of the kidnapping of Mohsen say that he went to a certain university Birzeit University, which is like a known terror hub, which really pathetic.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, that's a university in the occupied West Bank. So now it's illegal to go to a university in the West Bank where you're from. I mean, and again, it's not even they're pointing to things other people have done. They're pointing to fake things, like they claim that Jewish students were harassed and terrorized when this is not even true.
Right.
So they just detain people and then make up fake claims about what other people did and what people like Mahmoud Khalil aren't even accused of doing. And no one's accused of doing because no one's been charged for these crimes that they keep saying happened, including supporting Hamas, which of course they can't find any evidence for anywhere because no one has.
Right.
Okay.
You
Tom.
know what? One more thing I just want to say is, you know what, the argument of like, did this person do that? Did this person get due process when they refer to someone who was killed? It reminds me, Aaron, of the way that if you or I or anyone says like the United States needs to stop funding Israel, needs to stop providing them with bombs, needs to stop legitimizing them, the Israeli government, people will sometimes say, have you called on Hamas to release the prisoners, the hostages? And it's like equally unrelated and just an emotional argument that has nothing to do with how the world works. Okay.
All right. Congressmember Tom Emmer, he's a majority whip. He was asked also about Trump's call to deport U.S. citizens to foreign gulags, including in El Salvador.
Ask you about another idea that President Trump is floating. He's done so repeatedly, and that's the idea of deporting U.S. citizens convicted of violent crimes to El Salvador. You're not only a lawmaker, you are an attorney. Do you think the federal government has any legal authority to do that with American citizens?
I think right now what he's doing is absolutely legal, which is removing those that do not have legal status in this country that have proven to be the worst of the worst. This is what he promised Americans he would do.
Okay, so two things. One is he's clearly not answering the question, which is about U.S. citizens, but also in terms of the worst of the worst. So an analysis of court documents by Bloomberg News published earlier in April found that 90% of those sent to CCOT, which is the prison in El Salvador, in March had no U.S. criminal record, and 90% of them. So.
And you talk about me listening to the senator literally doesn't do anything for his constituent who is murdered mercilessly by an illegal alien let in under the Biden administration's open border policy. But boy, when an illegal alien gets deported to his country of origin, he flies right down to represent him. It seems to me that these Democrats are representing the illegal aliens against the very constituents, the U.S. citizens that they're supposed to be protecting.
What about the idea that the White House says that it is looking into whether or not U.S. citizens who are convicted of violent crimes can be imprisoned in El Salvador?
Don't answer it. Don't answer it.
Well, again, what they're focused on and what you and I are focusing on is what's actually happening, which is deporting terrorist cartel members, rapists, murderers. The worst of the worst is exactly what Donald Trump promised during the
hairdressers, like that man from Venezuela who claimed asylum and got deported because he has a tattoo of his mom and dad. He's not a alleged terrorist or murderer, or he's a hairdresser who was trying to seek asylum in the U.S. and got kidnapped.
I like the way he says what you and I are focusing on. She's focusing on the question of citizens, and he's refusing to focus on that. But should we give him one more chance, Aaron?
Sure.
Campaign, and that's why 77 million people, Dana, elected him to follow through on this promise, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah, the promise was not to deport citizens. Newsflash.
Yeah, it also wasn't to arrest people for writing op-eds supporting Palestinian rights. I don't recall him promising that either, but that's exactly what they're focusing on.
Okay. I just want to give you one more chance to say whether or not you're okay with U.S. citizens, the idea of it. I know it's not happening, but he has actively said more than once that they are looking into it. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah. Again, the issue that we're dealing with is that we got a president who wants to protect U.S. citizens from violence, from crime, having their children solicited, murdered, etc., versus Democrats who seem to want to protect illegal aliens in this country for whatever reason.
So refuses to answer the questions. And, you know, this guy who presents himself as such a law and order guy, I do want to tell you something. So in 2009, this guy, Emmer, sponsored a bill that would shorten the period of license revocation for driving under the influence and for refusing to take a field sobriety test. And when he was 20, he had a DUI-related ticket. Then at the age of 30, he pleaded guilty to reckless driving. So
that's what we want from our lawmakers. People can apply their own lived experience
right
to the job, you know, and to show empathy with people. And he has a lot of empathy for people who drive under the influence.
Right.
So yeah, well, that, you know, listen, I'll say this about the media right now. Having Trump in power makes them look so much better than they really are. Under Biden, they were constantly covering up for Biden. They were apologists, obviously, for the mass murder by Israel in Gaza, Ukraine proxy war. You know, they were not having a good moment. But with Trump in power, they've somehow woken up a little bit, and they're able to do their job sometimes. So at least we have that going for us under Trump. We have a media that sometimes look remotely competent.
But I will say, Aaron, that even Dan, I totally agree with you. We see them being adversarial in a way they weren't under Biden, right? But what's interesting is that even when they are adversarial, like in the case of Dana Bash, she still repeats these idiotic talking points, asking, we're not showing the clip because we don't have time, but asking Van Holland if Abrego Garcia, you know, respond to these claims that he committed this crime, that crime. And again, as Van Holland very patiently explained to like every person he spoke to, like that's not how due process works, right? So even when they are, the other thing, Aaron, is related to what you just said. You know, I was just thinking while we were watching this, and you said that, which is a great segue. Like, we saw Dana Bash interview Netanyahu, and where was that adversarial or even just honest questioning of Netanyahu? Imagine if she had interacted with Netanyahu the way she did with this guy. That would be impressive.
Well, that's going to take, I don't know, a couple generations before corporate news anchors feel empowered to be critical of Israel. It's going to take a while. We have to give ourselves time, you know, give ourselves time. Things move slowly in this country, especially when it comes to criticizing a foreign apartheid state.
Right.
All right. Congressmember Brian Fitzpatrick, he's a Republican. He just came back from Ukraine, and he's got some thoughts on the war.
But President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio have said that the U.S. has to figure out if a deal is doable in a matter of days or just move on. And on Friday, I asked President Trump about this fresh sense of urgency. Here's what he said. What do you need to see from both sides in order to keep negotiations going? What do you want to see from Russia and Ukraine?
I have to see. My whole life has been one big negotiation, and I know when people are playing us. And I have to see an enthusiasm to want to end it.
My whole life, by the way, has been one big negotiation. It's a strange way to describe one's existence. Everything is a negotiation. You know, it doesn't.
You did right or the deal, Aaron.
Yeah, but it's like if you have to constantly broker and negotiate just to sort of give your life purpose, it just doesn't sound like a very happy life. You know, I mean, why can't Trump just be? You know, why does he always have to be dealing and negotiating? And by the way, it's not really happening so far for him in Ukraine because he doesn't really seem that interested in applying any actual real political energy on solving that war. I mean, to his credit, he's talked about ending the war, which Biden refused to do. He's talking to Russia, which Biden refused to do. So that's good. But the problem now, he has this split cabinet. He's got neocons around him who don't want to end the war. And he's got some people who do want to end the war. And he strikes me as someone who just hasn't made up his mind yet on what exactly he wants to do, which is creating a lot of uncertainty. But it's always nice to hear a little bit of self-reflection from it, even from Donald Trump. And I just found it interesting. My whole life has been one big negotiation.
Yeah, maybe with himself too, Aaron. You think he's like wrestling with himself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, remember, we did point out that when he spoke to Welker, he did a lot of self-reflection, a lot of sharing about his emotions. So maybe this is a new improved Trump.
This is why we call it Meet the Depressed. But let's
Mm-hmm.
hear from Brian Fitzpatrick.
How much of this demand, Congressman, for enthusiasm do you think is a direct message to Russia? And how much time do these two sides have to get something done?
I like that Trump's main demand is he wants enthusiasm. He wants high energy. You know, it's like Russia, like you're being too low energy right now. You're being too low energy. What's some high energy? Like Jeb Bush, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I hope it's directed to Russia. I think it is directed to Russia. I can tell you, President Zelensky, the Ukrainian people, I know them well. I've lived there as an FBI agent. I was assigned there as a working Russian counterintelligence. They want peace. They're a peaceful nation. They're a democratically elected.
You know, by the way, I wonder if he was, I'm not sure when he worked there, but, you know, remember when the FBI asked Twitter to censor my social media, my Twitter account? That came from the FBI office in Ukraine, because Ukraine passed it on to them, and then they pass it on to their guys in Washington, and then guys in Washington pass it on to the FBI. So I wonder if, I mean, I didn't look it up when he worked there, but maybe he knows someone who was involved in trying to censor me. I don't know.
Well, I certainly hope, for the sake of Brian Fitzpatrick, that you are never in an Amtrak car with him.
Yeah,
because I could just imagine the ambush, and you could just ask him, "Were you part of my censorship?"
Yeah. I'd love to find out.
Yes, if not, it's a little anticlimactic, but yeah.
Elected officials, including President Zelensky, they want peace. They did not ask for this invasion. They did not provoke this invasion. They were invaded by Vladimir Putin, who had been telegraphing this punch for years. We all knew what he was intending to do, and now he's doing it. He views the fall of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical disaster of our lifetimes, and he's trying to recon.
Okay, so, you know, what we're getting here is like the classic list of just talking points to justify the proxy war, and it relies on cherry picking quotes and not showing their full accuracy. And of course, it never gets fact checked anywhere. But what Putin actually said is that it was a great disaster. It was a disaster because the fall of the Soviet Union left millions of people who identify as ethnic Russian outside of Russia's borders, and it's created a lot of problems, including in Ukraine. He's also said that anybody who wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union doesn't have a brain, which is the part they always leave out when they're talking about Putin and his supposed desire to reestablish the Soviet Empire. It's really, really silly at this point, but it keeps being repeated because no one ever corrects it.
Right. No one, right.
Constituted. Step one is Ukraine. We cannot allow him to do that. And what we also can't allow is for the precedent being set here that dictators are going to be rewarded for violating the territorial borders and territorial sovereignty of their neighbors. We cannot reward that. So, you know, I want to say this too. I think Secretary Rubio is doing a great job. He's a smart man. He understands Putin. He understands the dynamic of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the history there. And I have full faith in his ability to barter a just and fair agreement. But it's important to remember, and this applies to all agreements where we facilitate as a nation, that it's ultimately up to the nations to accept and abide by those conditions. President Zelensky, the Ukrainian people desperately want peace. They've always wanted peace. They were a peaceful nation before Russia wrongfully invaded them, and they want to get it back. But it's got to be a just and lasting peace.
See, this is like another myth that they push, which is that, oh, Ukraine was at peace before Russia invaded. You know, Russia split. No, actually, there was a war going on since 2014 when we didn't respect Ukraine's sovereignty because we backed the overthrow of its government and then encouraged its government to launch an attack on the Donbass, where people were living and rebelling against the coup that we supported, which is just context that you won't be allowed to say on corporate TV for, I don't know. I'm going to give it 50 years. Maybe 50 years from now, we'll be allowed to say that on TV. But until then, more spin like this.
Right. Yeah. And also, you know, people were like, you know, in Odessa, you had people burned alive, right? There was not, it was not peaceful. And in fact, there was a lot of violence that our media never covers.
You know, that's a great example, because only recently was there some new revelations about the Odessa massacre, which was as you said, a massacre where dozens of people who were rebelling against the Maidan coup. This is in May of 2014 when this happened. They're burned alive by people we were supporting who backed the coup. And only recently, like 10 years later, did we get some a very high level European investigation, which confirmed a lot of what was said by critics of the proxy war, that this was like a deliberate attack on people. But it takes like so long. And of course, the results of these investigations get buried, that nobody pays attention, especially after a lot of time passes. And that's the point. After a lot of time, you can finally acknowledge crimes we've supported and certain facts. But by the time you can acknowledge them, the damage has been done. And in this case, now we're in a horrible proxy war that Trump is talking about ending, but we'll really see how much weight he's willing to put behind it, because so far he seems a little unsure of himself.
Right.
And that doesn't help. It doesn't help that he's surrounded by people like Marco Rubio, who've been pushing the proxy war in Ukraine for a very, very long time.
Right. And, you know, another relevant point I would say is that, and we had, of course, a guest on to talk about this, Marta, who's Ukrainian. She's talked about how, you know, Zelensky had support. He ran as a peace candidate on the auspices of peace, and now he's much less democratic, certainly not as peace seeking, but also there's been a lot of shutdown of independent media and independent parties, and and some of that happened before the invasion too.
Absolutely. All right, let's turn to Democratic minority leader Hakeem Jeffries. He's facing the problem of progressives once again, where, you know, people like Bernie Sanders and AOC have been doing a tour of the country, the Fight the Oligarchy tour, and they've been speaking to massive crowds, which is leading some people to think, hey, maybe we should pay more attention to these progressives. Maybe they actually have something right here. Let's hear from Hakeem Jeffries with his thoughts.
Huge crowds that Bernie Sanders and AOC have gotten at their Fighting Oligarchy tour. Is that where the energy of the Democratic Party is right now? Is it with the progressive left? Is that the direction the party's going to turn?
I think the energy of the Democratic Party right now is across the board, and everyone has made that observation that this is not a right-left moment. It's a moment of right versus wrong, and we've got to.
I haven't heard anyone make that observation, but
neither.
I do like the implicit acknowledgement that he represents the right of the Democratic Party, right? It's not a right-left moment, so it's not a moment between me on the right and Bernie and AOC on the left. It's right and wrong.
Right.
Well, Bernie Sanders says the oligarchy is wrong, and he's also been increasingly critical of the Democratic establishment. Although, come 2028, I'm sure he will campaign for whoever the centrist Democratic candidate is. But good to see Hakeem Jeffries at least being challenged from the left.
I mean, it's also funny, like he really got cocky with his you know, alphabetical speech. You know, what is it, like democracy, not defamation, whatever it was. But he also is definitely has his thumb on the scale, or at least a real perspective that I think is worth showing. So, but yeah, so I think he has a lot of confidence in his like stupid, snappy talking points. Like it's not right, right, left, it's right, wrong. But let's just take a quick look at something that Hakeem Jeffries said back in 2016. While Wilson's getting that ready, we can keep playing this.
To be able to stand up to this assault that is underway, led by Donald Trump and his compliant Republicans in the House and in the Senate, an assault on the economy, on Social Security, on Medicaid, an assault on the democratic way of life as we know it.
I saw Senator Sanders said in an interview this week that he was skeptical of Kamala Harris, and he mentioned Joe Biden as well, and having a future in the National Democratic Party. He said, quote, "I think the future of the Democratic Party is not going to rest with the kind of leadership that we've had." Is he right? Do you think Democrats are looking for new leaders?
I think what we've got in front of us in terms of politically is that we have to win the races that are up next. That's a governor's race in New Jersey and a governor's race in Virginia. Those two in November are going to be critically important. And we certainly have to win back control of the House of Representatives next year. Now, we're pushing back in the Congress, we're pushing back in the courts, and we're pushing back in the communities, including wherever there are special elections on the campaign trail. And in fact, Democrats are winning special elections month after month after month, including most recently a decisive one in Wisconsin earlier this month.
Okay, so again, not answering the question. I do like the way he's asked about Bernie Sanders' statement, and this is actually something that people should know that Hakeem Jeffries said about Bernie Sanders in the past. Let's take a look. So this is from the Times. So he called Bernie Sanders a gun-loving socialist with zero foreign policy experience. So maybe he's not the most reliable source when it comes to analyzing Bernie Sanders.
All right. Well, let's hear more analysis of Bernie Sanders from Meet the Depressed.
More with the panel next.
We believe in an economy that works for all, not just for Musk and his fellow billionaires.
If you even voted for Donald Trump in the past and are open to changing your mind, come on in.
Welcome back. The panel is still here. Maria Teresa, we are seeing Senator Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hold these rallies across the country, warning of what they say is an emerging oligarchy. Do you think this is where the party is? Is it galvanizing the party? Is it moving the party further to the left? What do you make of these?
I'm going to look at what's happening right now in Folsom County in California. It is a county of 85,000 people, and 30,000 people showed up to that rally. And I think that they are touching on the moment that we're living in, as Trump did. We're in a populist moment. And when you have almost a third of registered voters who sat it out, saying the system's not for me, it's too icky, and government is not functioning for me, they're meeting folks there. And I do think that there's an opportunity for the Democrats to embrace these masses, speak about modernizing our government for the 21st century. I mean, Trump is taking a sledgehammer to it, and you can say, you know what, let's not be part of the status quo. Let's use this moment to reimagine our institutions for the 21st century, because they were constructed 100 years ago. But then start talking about moderate policies. What they want at the end of the day, I think the majority of the American people want, they want someone fighting for them in a way that they understand. And they recognize that, yes, the cost of eggs are too high. Yes, if you do mass deportations, who's actually going to pick our food? Who's going to basically, take care of our hotels? I mean, you talk to right now to the airline industry, nobody wants to come to the United States right now because they're afraid that they're going to get deported. I mean, you hear about the stories of tourists that came here wrongfully and got shackled and sent back to Germany. If you look at, there was a piece in the Washington Post that across Europe, people who are intending to come here for the summer, they're canceling their plans. That's not actually a policy. But the Democrats have to be strong and say, look, what we're seeing on the ground is a swell of pay attention. We want our democracy to work, but you have to come up with policies that meet us where we are.
The ripple effect.
So what I'm hearing is basically like all these people going to progressive rallies, they don't actually want progressive policies. They just want centrist Democrats. That's the message I'm getting here, because note how she's not talking about how like people want universal health care, which is like the main demand of the Bernie Sanders AOC wing. So this is like the new corporate spin that I'm getting from this clip and others, which is basically people coming out for Bernie Sanders and AOC means we want centrism. We want energetic centrism.
Yeah, she literally says people have to talk about moderate policies.
Yeah.
That's her response to how overwhelmingly popular these things are. It's just unbelievable. Like, there's just no evidence for it.
And what's also happening at these rallies, people are calling out the genocide in Gaza, and the polls show that most Democrats are opposed to the genocide in Gaza, and they want politicians to reflect that. But you don't see anybody, again, saying we should listen to our own voters and stop supporting Israel, and maybe recognize that, Biden bear hugging Benjamin Netanyahu helped cost us the election.
Right. By the way, something I meant to say about Hakeem Jeffries before, since he's talking about it's not left or right or wrong, and you just mentioned opposition to the genocide. Here's how out of step Hakeem and cowardly Hakeem Jeffries is. When Mahmoud Khalil was basically kidnapped, this is what his statement said. Leader Jeffries' statement on ICE arrests at Columbia University. Mahmoud Khalil is a legal permanent resident whose wife, an American citizen, is 8 months pregnant. To the extent his actions were inconsistent with Columbia University policy and created an unacceptable hostile academic environment for Jewish students and others, there's a serious university disciplinary process that can handle the matter. So again, then he's basically like, so handle it that way, not by kidnapping him, but he's just totally incorporating this talking point, this unfounded talking point that weaponizes anti-Semitism to justify crackdown on free speech. So maybe he's really, I mean, that's just such an embarrassing statement. He just should have said nothing if he was going to say that. And these are the people who know where the Democratic Party is going.
All right. Well, let's do something a little unusual. We're a Sunday morning recap show, but Friday is also a time of some funny content. And a big thing that got attention last week was Douglas Murray, the British neocon pundit, debating comedian and former Useful Idiots guest Dave Smith on the Joe Rogan show about Palestine. And Dave Smith, a comedian, destroyed Douglas Murray, the supposed expert pundit. And Douglas Murray made a big thing about the fact that, like, we don't listen to the experts anymore, as if he is one of those experts. And he went on Bill Maher's show on Friday night to whine about the fact that basically people aren't trusting the so-called experts. And this is some of their exchange.
Bernie Sanders and AOC going around the country now and getting huge crowds. And I read that they were in Boise, Idaho, not exactly a blue state. And the crowd, but their crowd, of course, is a very liberal crowd. And a chant of Free Palestine went up and pretty much stopped the show. So I kind of worry that that's where the Democratic Party is, that this is their next stupid hill to die on.
Yeah.
So the chant of Free Palestine, free from who, I would like to ask. Do they realize who is really the people who are enslaving the people of Palestine?
Free from who? I mean, imagine posing that question. Like, how incredibly deluded you have to be to pose that as a question when Israel's running one of the longest military occupations in the world that the entire world regards as illegal. And Bill Maher and Douglas Murray are asking free from who? Free from who?
Yeah.
And yeah, that is the party that is the hill that maybe Democrats want to climb on, because most of their voters want a free Palestine.
Right.
And a strong number of Republicans do as well. People are getting tired of this, of seeing everyday children slaughtered with our bombs, and they can't understand why people could possibly object to that.
I mean, it's funny you said Bill Murray, Aaron. Maybe that's because this is like Groundhog's Day. We keep hearing them say the same thing, but it is, as you said, they should have climbed that hill, because we know that for the biggest concern, the top concern for people who voted for Biden in 2020 and didn't vote for Kamala was the genocide. And I just want to play Murray's response to that, because there's an implicit, it's a leading question, obviously, when Bill Maher asks, free them from whom? I mean, I know who is starving the people of Gaza, who's cutting off humanitarian support, who's bombing churches and hospitals and children. Really hard to figure that out. But luckily we have expert Douglas Murray. He's going to tell us.
If those moronic people had any knowledge, they would say, free Palestine from Hamas. At the very least, they'd do that.
Yeah. Hamas is Hamas, which was established in 1987, somehow has been enslaving Palestine since 1948.
Well, that's unfortunately a large segment of liberals still. Like Bill Maher is supposed to represent common sense moderates, liberals. He actually recently met with Donald Trump at the White House, and one of the things he praised him for was his support for Israel. And look, I hope that's not the hill the Democrats die on, is clinging to this foreign apartheid state still committing genocide and refusing to take the political opportunity now to break from Trump. I mean, they wouldn't under Biden, but now that Trump's overseeing the Biden policy genocide, maybe they'll take that opportunity. But let's go to one more clip because, again, this is a revelation that should have been covered, I think, on the Sunday shows if they were still paying attention to Gaza, but they're not. But the former Israeli defense minister, Yoav Gallant, he recently did an interview, and listen to what he said about Hamas's goals in this whole nightmare conflict.
In Hamas since it was established in 87, and I know them quite good. And I knew that they will not give you anything unless you have something that they really need. And this is not the prisoners. The prisoners in Israel...
Meaning the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons.
The Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons was already given. They were speaking about Israel withdrawing from Judah and Samaria. They were speaking about how to divide Jerusalem in their thinking. So
what he's saying there is Hamas, yes, they wanted Israel to release Palestinian hostages, but they also wanted Israel to withdraw from Judea and Samaria. And what's that? That's the West Bank. That's what Israel calls the occupied West Bank, where Israel has stolen so much land and built these illegal settlements, which of course...
Bill Clinton, right? Doesn't Bill Clinton call it that too?
Bill Clinton does call it. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And by the way, this excuse that we have to free, from Bill Maher and Douglas Murray, we have to free Palestinians from Hamas. Well, Hamas isn't even in the West Bank, so I don't know how they apply that excuse there. But that's what Yoav Gallant is saying here, that for Hamas, this wasn't just about freeing. They also wanted to get an end to the occupation, the illegal occupation. And he says they're talking about how to divide Jerusalem, which means that Hamas was not saying we want all of Jerusalem. We just want the Palestinian parts of Jerusalem, which again, that's the international consensus of letting Palestinians have their own state in just 22% of their historic homeland, which is the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And that's what Hamas is willing to accept. And that's what no Israeli or U.S. government has ever been willing to accept. And that's why we still have this atrocity, this crime against humanity committing today, because Israel's more committed to defending its occupation than it is even to rescuing its own hostages. And that's what Yoav Gallant is admitting right there. Right.
They don't even know. The nice thing about Israelis is that they don't even they do. Israeli politicians and ministers, they lie pathologically, but they also can be very honest because they're not used to having to cater to people who want to see Palestinians as human beings. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Well, on that note, let me plug something as we wrap the show. May 5th, if you're in New York City, there are still some tickets left for this. Palestine.
Or even in the tri-state area. You could come
sure,
on that
yeah.
from Connecticut and New Jersey.
Yeah. Palestine, the moral issue of our time, with my dad, Gabor, and Chris Hedges. They'll be speaking together. It's going to be at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. May 5th, still some tickets left. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And I'll be there, by the way. So big incentive. I mean, I won't be speaking, but I'll be in the audience. So you get to hear Gabor and Chris, and then you get to get the vibe of Katie Halper.
And speaking of Katie Halper, is there anything you want to plug for your show this week?
Well, we're gonna have on Alec Karakansasi soon. Maybe tomorrow, I'm not sure. And he wrote this great book, Propaganda. We're also going to have on, not this week, but coming up, Oliver Stone talking about JFK. So make sure that you tune in to the Katie Halper Show at youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show. Yeah. And yeah, we did a Whitney Webb interview, which people are loving. Lots of connecting of dots. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's our show. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support the show, get bonus content, and keep us going. Thanks so much for watching Monday Morning. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.